Bueno, hola a todos. De parte de Clínica Kumara y bueno, de mi persona, les doy a todos la más cordial bienvenida. Pues este va a ser un webinar español-inglés. Para las personas que no hablan inglés, vamos a tratar de poner en el chat toda la traducción de lo que Dr. Tom nos va a decir. Sí, por favor, les pedimos que si tienen dudas, las pueden hacer en la parte de preguntas y respuestas, no por favor a través del chat, para que sea mucho más fácil para nosotros poder traducírselas. Las pueden hacer en español, no hay ningún problema. Igualmente, si las pueden hacer en inglés y se van a traducir al español para aquellas personas que no las entienden. La dinámica va a ser al final, cuando cada persona puede hacer las preguntas. Y bueno, realmente esto pues es un placer para nosotros de parte de Clínica Kumara y de parte mía. Yo soy la doctora Patricia Madrigal, soy médico integrativo. Y bueno, pues esta es la tercera vez que tenemos la dicha de contar con el doctor Tom O'Bryan. Para los que no lo conocen, el doctor Tom O'Bryan pues es una autoridad en el tema de medicina funcional. Tiene 40 años de experiencia como médico funcional. Aparte de eso, es el autor de esos dos libros que pueden ver ahí, You Can Fix Your Brain and Autoimmune Fix. Y por ejemplo, el de Autoimmune Fix se encuentra en español, se llama La curación autoinmune. Todavía no los tenemos acá en Costa Rica, pero esperamos que pronto, estamos viendo si se pueden traer y por supuesto en español y en inglés. Y Dr. Tom también pues es un orador internacional muy reconocido, da charlas en todo el mundo y ha formado una gran cantidad de médicos y de terapeutas funcionales en todo el mundo, y realmente pues para nosotros es una bendición tenerlo acá. Today, our special guest is Dr. Tom O'Bryan, author of these amazing books, The Autoimmune Fix and You Can Fix Your Brain. He's a recognized international expert and international speaker on chronic disease and metabolic and gluten-related disorders. Dr. Tom has more than 40 years of experience as a functional medicine practitioner, and today he is here with us to speak and teach about intestinal permeability. So, Tom, thank you a lot. And I don't have words because it's like a dream to me have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Patricia. Thank you. I'll turning on my screen now to share with everyone. Hello, everyone. It's a real honor to be with you. And I started with that video. Let us all remember that music is international. And in this time of crisis that we are in around the world, let's remember what keeps us together as humans and all of the same tribe. And tonight's topic is what I consider a universal topic. It is the primary focus of my professional work, is the understanding of intestinal permeability and the consequences of intestinal permeability throughout the body. And so let's just get into it. I have a great deal of information to share with you, and I will go at a fairly quick pace. So you are welcome to review this again and again and again. It will be recorded so that you have the opportunity to view this again. Okay, here we go. Thank you to Dra.Patricia Madrigal and Kumara Clinic for hosting and being such a wonderful host for my wife and I while we are here in Costa Rica, which is a real honor to be here in paradise. And thank you all for taking the time to be here tonight. I will do my best to make this of value for you. And my goal is that it stimulates what becomes a paradigm shift for you in how you think. And so if we wait for the markers of disease, we have a much more difficult time playing catch up to try to reverse the direction of where this body has gone. And of course, we want to identify these things as early as possible, which makes it easier to arrest or stop the progression of the imbalance before it gets to a diagnosable disease. Or for those who have a diagnosable disease, still this will help to arrest and reverse the direction their body is going. That is the goal here. And how does chronic inflammatory disease develop? First, we must understand that as far as I know, all chronic diseases are diseases of inflammation. It's always inflammation. At the cellular level, the cell is on fire. The question is it a brain cell or a kidney cell? Is it gasoline or kerosene? But it's always a fire. And when we understand that, then the question is, where is the inflammation coming from? And that's what this topic is about tonight. And the first concept and person I want to introduce you to is one of my mentors and my friend, Professor Alessio Fasano. It was Professor Fasano and his team who identified in 1997 the protein zonulin as the protein involved in the development of intestinal permeability. And as the chair of pediatric gastroenterology and the director of mucosal immunology at Harvard and all of his other positions, he is always very, very careful of what he says because he knows that he can be misquoted very easily. I want to show you one of his most recent papers that just came out in January of this year. Look at the title. All disease begins in the leaky gut. The role of zonulin mediated gut permeability in the development of chronic inflammatory diseases. So this is the chair of pediatric gastroenterology at Harvard saying all disease begins in the leaky gut. Now, we all know that Hippocrates said this over 3,000 years ago, all disease begins in the gut. This is what I'm going to talk about is the mechanism of how this occurs. There is growing evidence that the elements of gut permeability, the immune system response, the microbiome of the gut, along with genetics and environmental triggers, make the perfect storm for chronic inflammatory disease to develop. Professor Fasano identifies 5 pillars in the development of chronic inflammatory diseases. When we understand this as the underlying mechanism, it then becomes clearer how do we investigate what the triggers are for this patient and how can I help this patient, whatever they present with. It doesn't matter what they present with. So the perfect storm that Professor Fasano is talking about. I love this picture because this is how our patients are when they come to us with a disease, with an inflammatory disease. They're trying to survive in the midst of their environment that is so inflammatory for them. So what are the 5 pillars? First, a genetic vulnerability. I'll use the example of celiac disease. We know that there are 2 main genes that make a person vulnerable to develop celiac disease, and somewhere between 93 to 95% of all celiacs have the gene HLA-DQ2 or HLA-DQ8. Not every celiac, but somewhere between 93 and 95% of them have this gene. Next, the environmental trigger that sets off the genes. And with celiac, we know that it's wheat. And with other autoimmune diseases, we know there are numerous triggers that have been identified. I will be talking about that as we progress. Next, an altered microbiome, dysbiosis, from a lifetime of exposure of what we eat and what we drink determines what type of a microbiome we have. Now, when you have a dysbiotic microbiome, it creates an inflammatory environment in the gut. With that inflammatory environment, you develop intestinal permeability. When you develop intestinal permeability, then the systemic immune response, as these large molecules get through the leaky gut into the bloodstream, your immune system takes off, trying to protect you from these molecules. If they are wheat molecules, the immune system attacks wheat, and then the trickle-down effects of that can be to your thyroid or to your brain or to your joints or to your skin. If it's a bacteria such as Klebsiella, we all know about the gene HLA-B27 and Klebsiella pneumonia infections creating a perfect storm to develop ankylosing spondylitis and many other autoimmune diseases. These are the 5 pillars in the development of autoimmune disease. And we understand that the things that we have complete control over, are numbers 2, 3, and 4. The environmental triggers, if it's celiac, stop eating wheat. The microbiome, rebuild a healthy microbiome. We will talk tonight of how to rebuild a healthy microbiome, and healing intestinal permeability. So if you have a patient and you've identified they have intestinal permeability, and you've read that glutamine helps to heal intestinal permeability, do you give them glutamine? Yes, as a component, but they can't keep living the lifestyle with the exposure to the environmental triggers and the altered microbiome and expect that the permeability is not going to come back. So you have to address the 3 middle components here when dealing with chronic inflammatory diseases. If there is one concept that becomes the paradigm that you look through, the glasses that you wear in practice when working with your patients, this is it. This is the paradigm that is essential that you include in your evaluation of your patients with chronic inflammatory diseases. Professor Fasano's article, among the several potential intestinal stimuli that stimulate zonulin release, intestinal permeability, small intestine exposure to bacteria and its exhaust, lipopolysaccharides, and gluten have been identified as the 2 most powerful triggers. Every time you eat wheat, you develop intestinal permeability. Every time. Gluten is misinterpreted by the zonulin pathway as a potential harmful component of a microorganism, of a bug. Your body thinks, the immune system in your gut thinks that gluten is a bug. Now, we know that gliadin, one of the proteins in gluten, triggers toll-like receptor 2 and toll-like receptor 4 in every patient, every time they're exposed to it, not just celiacs, every person. Not just gliadin though, there are other components of wheat also that trigger toll-like receptor 4. Toll-like receptor 4 is the sentry standing guard to protect you in case anything comes into the small intestine out of the stomach that is a threat. Any bacteria, any bugs that hydrochloric acid does not kill in the stomach, if they come through into the small intestine, toll-like receptor 4 is standing guard there to activate an immune response. And Dr. Madrigal and I reviewed this concept in detail back in June. And that Zoom meeting is available to you, where we spent the entire hour talking about wheat. I'm not going to talk anymore about wheat tonight. Just a little reminder, and to encourage the new attendees to go back to the June Facebook Live event and watch it there. So one of the concepts I want to make, I don't think I elaborated enough back in June that I want to talk about now, is that when you put your patients on a gluten-free diet, it's not safe. It's not safe. At Columbia University, their celiac center, Dr. Peter Green, very famous gastroenterologist, published a study, and they took 804 testers with testing equipment, and they went into restaurants all over the United States. And they ordered from gluten-free menus in gluten-free restaurants. They ordered 5,624 different foods on a gluten-free menu. When the waiter or waitress took the order and walked away, the testers opened their briefcase, put the testing equipment on the table. When the waiter or waitress brought the food back, they immediately took the food and put it in the testing equipment, testing it for gluten. Now, this is gluten-free labeled restaurant food. What did they find? 32% of everything labeled gluten-free is not gluten-free. It's not. 27% of breakfasts were not gluten-free, 34% of dinners were not gluten-free, 53% of gluten-free pizza is not gluten-free, 51% of gluten-free pasta is not gluten-free. Jaw-dropping. They just published this in March of last year in the American Journal of Gastroenterology. The takeaway from this is that it's not safe to eat gluten-free food because it only takes a minor amount to activate toll-like receptor 4. And if you eat gluten-free pasta that is not gluten-free, that is enough gluten to trigger the systemic inflammatory cascade in your gut, bringing the intestinal permeability back, activating the inflammatory cascade systemically, and here comes your thyroid antibodies again, or your collagen antibodies, or your skin antibodies, or your brain antibodies, from the minutest of exposure. And it takes anywhere from 60 days, 2 months, to 4 months to get rid of the antibodies from one exposure. That means your patient is continually inflamed for the next few months because they ate gluten-free pasta that was not gluten-free. It's not safe. And in the webinar we did back in June, we talked in detail about wheat rescue. I put this formula together because there's nothing like it in the world. You take wheat rescue before you eat anything that may be contaminated. One capsule of wheat rescue will digest the hidden glutens and other proteins of wheat in a slice of whole wheat bread. I never advocate that you tell your patient that because they think that they can eat the whole wheat bread and then just take the capsules and they're fine. And it's not safe to do that. But these are very effective enzymes to protect you and protect your family. The activation of the zonulin pathway represents a defensive mechanism by our immune system to flush out the bugs. Because what zonulin does is it opens up the gateway in between the cells of the intestines, and to flush out, water comes into the intestines to wash out whatever is the threat that toll-like receptor 4 has identified. The activation of the zonulin pathway represents a defensive mechanism that flushes out microorganisms, contributing to the innate immune response of the host against changes in the ecosystem of the microbiome, specifically bacteria trying to colonize in the small intestine or changes in its composition or both. That's why wheat activates zonulin, because toll-like receptor 4 thinks wheat is a parasite. It's a bacterial parasite. And it happens every time you eat wheat. And perhaps in another webinar, I can show you the videos of how this occurs within 5 minutes of wheat coming out of the stomach into the small intestine. Within 5 minutes, you see intestinal permeability, the cameras in the gut, and you see it happening. I look forward to sharing that with you next time. These data suggest that gut permeability contributes to the development of several chronic inflammatory diseases, provided that the person carries the gene and that the microbiome's imbalanced and that the immune system responds. Gluten's misinterpreted as a bug, a harmful component of a microorganism. We have to remember that. Every patient, every time they eat wheat, without exception. Gut permeability contributes to the development of several chronic inflammatory diseases, and it's the imbalanced microbiome where we need to primarily focus. Of course, the environmental trigger, don't eat wheat and don't get exposure to contaminated foods that are supposed to be gluten-free. That's part of the environment, but we have the imbalanced microbiome is what we're going to talk about quite a bit tonight. Indeed, the growing evidence that the additional and mutually influenced elements of the triad of permeability, the immune response, the gut microbiome with genetics and environmental trigger make the perfect storm. This is where chronic inflammatory diseases originate. When you stop this mechanism, you arrest the development of autoimmune diseases. That is what my book, The Autoimmune Fix, is all about, with over 300 studies in it. When you read this book, you understand this mechanism completely. And the book is now in Spanish, so it's available in English and in Spanish for you. Remember that your body is a superorganism with thousands of microbial genomes continually interacting with the human genome. We've all heard that there's 10 times more cells of the microbiota than human cells, and 100 to 150 times more genes. It's not showing you the studies to that tonight, but we've all heard that before. But I wanted to show you this from Professor Schoenfeld, the godfather of autoimmunity. In chapter 10 of his book, they tell us that of the small molecules in the healthy human blood, over a third of those molecules come from the microbiome of the gut. The messengers of the microbiome in the gut are throughout the bloodstream, carrying messages. You may have heard me say before, for every message from the brain telling the gut what to do, there are 9 messages from the gut telling the brain what to do. The gut modulates brain neurotransmitter production and quantities, thus neurotransmitter function. And it's not just the brain, the heart, the liver, the kidneys, that 1/3 of all the small molecules in the bloodstream at any one time come from the microbiome in your gut. If you have a pathogenic microbiome, what do you think the messengers are carrying throughout the bloodstream to the rest of your body? Gram-negative bacteria and their endotoxins may be and I called it exhaust. LPS is just the exhaust of gram-negative bacteria. May be a causal or complicating factor in many serious diseases. The syndromes most commonly connected with endotoxins are sepsis and septic shock. This is a critically important thing to understand. It baffles me why there is so little conversation around sepsis. Sepsis caused by invasive gram-negative bacteria is a well-known source of endotoxins. According to the Center for Disease Control, 1.7 million Americans every year get sepsis, and 270,000 people a year die from it. That's 1 in 3 patients who die in a hospital die from sepsis. Where does sepsis come from? It comes from intestinal permeability, from the leaky gut for many years. I'll show you. Sepsis is calculated as killing more individuals annually than prostate cancer, breast cancer, and HIV combined. The number of cases affected by sepsis creep up year after year. This is from the Center for Disease Control, that 35% of people with sepsis get lung infections. This is the primary mechanism that's happening with SARS-CoV-2 when people are put in intensive care. This is going on in their body. It's sepsis that's causing the cytokine storm for many of these people. There are a number of papers now that have come out on this. So why do they get sepsis? Because they have years of accumulation of endotoxin throughout their body. This drawing opened my eyes so many years ago when it came out in 2010 to the seriousness of lipopolysaccharides. So what we have, first we have just a minute, my clicker got stuck. There we go. It may affect LPS, and the accumulation of endotoxin may affect cardiovascular, surgery, heart disease, digestive system diseases, respiratory diseases, renal diseases, cancer, autoimmune diseases, infections, burns. First, we're healthy. Then we get intestinal permeability that develops. That puts us at risk. LPS, endotoxin, gets into the bloodstream, eventually causing a systemic inflammatory response, which may manifest as a diagnosable chronic inflammatory disease like diabetes or rheumatoid or psoriasis. But if the endotoxin accumulation continues, we get sepsis, which progresses into multiple organ dysfunction and death. That is a dynamic that kills over 270,000 Americans every year and throughout the world. I just don't have the numbers in other countries. But the mechanism is the 5 pillars that Professor Fasano talks about that set up the chronic inflammatory disease. I'm hoping you'll review this again and again and again and really wrestle with these concepts until they become the paradigm that you live by and your practice is based on. Of course, we always want to deliver symptom relief as quickly as possible, but we have to come up with the education systems for our patients to explore why did they get here. We have to look at where is it coming from. So how does LPS get into the bloodstream? I know of 6 methods, there may be more, but the first one to talk about is the oral cavity. Why do dentists give antibiotics when they work in your mouth? There's only one reason I know of. Because when they're working in your mouth, they squirt water and you lean over and spit the water out and you have pink water or red water because blood. They just gave you leaky gums. And the leaky gums take 2-3 days to heal. And you have over 800 different families of bacteria in your mouth, in the oral cavity. And if you have leaky gums, and if some of the strep that's in your mouth, streptococcus, gets through the leaky gums into circulation, your immune system gets activated to protect you from the strep. And you make antibodies to Streptococcus. That's a very good thing. But because of molecular mimicry, the protein signature of Streptococcus that the antibodies often are looking for looks very similar to the protein structure of the valves of your heart. And the antibodies against Streptococcus will attack the valves of your heart. That's called molecular mimicry. That's rheumatic fever, and that will kill you. So the dentists, to prevent that, give antibiotics when they're working in your mouth. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's why they do it. Because if you have antibiotics in circulation in your bloodstream, if any strep gets through the leaky gums in the few days after the dentist has worked on you, the antibiotics hopefully will kill it and your body will not make antibodies to Streptococcus. So that's the first passageway of LPS. And then of course, an open wound, and then septicemia, lipid raft transcytosis, air pollution, pathogenic intestinal permeability. Those are the 6 pathways that I'm familiar with by which LPS gets into your bloodstream, accumulating over the years, eventually producing sepsis in so many people. So what is the leaky gut? That's the one we're talking about today. What is the leaky gut? And you are welcome to use this example with your patients or change it any way you want. But the concept, I think, is very helpful for patients. So the drawing here shows you 2 cells of the intestines and the microvilli in between the 2 cells of your intestines. And B on the right is a picture of 2 cells of the intestines and the tight junction in between. TJ stands for tight junction. MV stands for microvilli, which is here. And these are the microvilli here. Now, if we blow up this picture here between the 2 cells, this is what it looks like. So this is between the 2 cells of the epithelial lining, and these are the tight junctions, and you can see that they are pinched together. It's called the tight junction strands, and where they touch is called the kissing joints. And I explain to patients, think of the Panama Canal, that the gates of the Panama Canal open, and the food molecules go into then the gates close. Your immune system checks out what this is. Then the next gates open. The food goes further down in the tight junction. Then those gates close behind. And then the immune system's checking out again. And then the next gates open. And this goes on and on and on and on to make sure that nothing gets in that is a threat. So there are many different passageways in the canal of the tight junction, but eventually the food gets to the other side and now it's in your bloodstream. So patients understand this visual, this analogy of the gates of the Panama Canal. Now, I'd like to use the Panama Canal more for doctors, and when you see the pictures, it makes sense. And for the patients, I'll say the Panama Canal, but then I say, Mrs. Patient, your intestines are a tube. Starts at the mouth, goes to the other end, winds around in the center there. It's about 20, 25 feet long, but it's one big tube. If you think of your digestive tract like a donut, and if you could stretch a donut out, that's your digestive tract. Now, when you look down the donut and you swallow food, look down the donut, the food's in the donut. It's not in the body yet. It's got to go through the walls of the body to get into the bloodstream. How does that happen? The inside of the donut is lined with cheesecloth. This is a picture of my hand with cheesecloth. And patients understand that. Only really small molecules get through the cheesecloth. So our digestive enzymes have to break down the food like scissors, chopping a pearl necklace. Clip, 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 until you've got first the pearl necklace. Hydrochloric acid undoes the clasp of the pearl necklace. Now you have a string of pearls, and our enzymes snip it into 2, and into 4, and to 8, 16, 64. Snip, 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 smaller, smaller, until it's down to each pearl of the pearl necklace, called an amino acid, that goes right through the cheesecloth into the bloodstream. And if you think of proteins like a raspberry, and when you eat a protein, now raspberries look the same. Every piece looks the same. Every pearl of the pearl necklace looks the same. But a raspberry can't fit through the cheesecloth. It's got to be made smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it's so small, each pearl of the pearl necklace, each amino acid can go right through the cheesecloth. Digestion is breaking down the food into very, very small pieces. Absorption means going through the cheesecloth, getting into the mucosa, into the bloodstream. And the larger molecules cannot get through. They just will not get through the cheesecloth. And when you have a healthy gut, only the small molecules can get through into the submucosa, into the bloodstream. The larger molecules have to go further down the digestive tract, being made smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. But when you have tears in the cheesecloth, when you have intestinal permeability, tears in the cheesecloth, now the small molecules still get through, but the larger molecules, they get right through the tears in the cheesecloth. They're called macromolecules, big molecules. And they're not supposed to get through. They're supposed to go further down the digestive tract until they've been broken down small enough. But when you have damage to your intestines, now the big molecules get through. And notice they get through right between the cells and through the cells, both ways. But that's the concept of the macromolecules getting into the bloodstream. And if you do a 90 food panel looking for food sensitivity, for these patients, it comes back and they're sensitive to 20, 25 different foods. And the patient says, oh my God, that's everything I eat. And they say, of course it is. Your immune system's trying to protect you. You have a problem in the intestines. We have to fix the problem in the intestines. Then we'll recheck you in 6 months. Now you'll be sensitive to 2 foods, maybe 3. Once again, Professor Pisano tells us that gluten and LPS are the 2 most powerful triggers causing tears in the cheesecloth. Every person, every time, tears in the cheesecloth. And Professor Schoenfeld tells us the development of autoimmune diseases are the 5-pillar concept. And he published this before Professor Pisano came out with that paper that came out in January. But this is the development of autoimmune diseases, is this 5-pillar concept, the systemic immune response, which initiates the autoimmune spectrum, and now you start making antibodies to your joints, and eventually you get rheumatoid, or now you start making antibodies to your brain, and eventually you get brain fog, or seizures, or depression, or anxiety. Autoimmune, just Google depression and inflammation, and you'll see all the studies that show depression is a chronic inflammatory disease. Anxiety is a chronic, just read the papers. You'll find so many papers on this concept if you just look. These are the 3 areas you have complete control over. That doesn't mean it's easy, but these are the areas where we have to focus our clinical expertise to help our patients turn around the direction their health is going in. How many of you know of patients with type 2 diabetes who reverse their type 2 diabetes by taking metformin or glucophage. I don't know of any. They can get it under control, hopefully help, but stop the metformin, stop the glucophage, and the diabetes comes back. Unless you deal with the environmental triggers, the altered microbiome in the gut, and intestinal permeability. Then you have a chance of arresting the development of autoimmune diseases. And the rule is always test, don't guess. So I'm going to talk for a minute about testing for intestinal permeability. In 2016, a new laboratory opened, 2015, a new laboratory opened. This paper published from Joe Murray and his team at Mayo Clinic, and Dr. Murray is one of the greats as a gastroenterologist in the world of celiac disease. They identified that this new technology called silicone chip technology was 97 to 99% sensitive and 98 to 100% specific, meaning it's right every time. There is no laboratory in the world that can make that claim, except this laboratory with silicone chip technology. I now have 4 papers from them on this technology and 2 papers from Columbia University saying the same thing. Peter Green, who published the paper in Gastroenterology about hidden gluten in gluten-free foods, that team at Columbia also published on this technology that it's a game changer technology. And their test called a wheat zoomer includes testing for intestinal permeability or the leaky gut. This is the section that tests for, this is the most comprehensive test I know of for intestinal permeability. It is not yet available in most places in the world outside of the United States, but they want to bring it to the world. And they're now open and receptive to bringing it to the world. And so we are actively working now to bring this technology and this laboratory service around the world. This is the component on leaky gut. And I want to talk about the zonulin that Professor Fasano talks about. Many of the papers identifying zonulin in the development of autoimmune diseases and chronic inflammatory diseases, many of them talk about zonulin, the protein itself. The problem is that the lifespan of zonulin, let me see here, oh, let me back it, there it is. The lifespan of zonulin is 4 minutes to 4 hours. So if you do a blood test for zonulin, you easily could miss it because the lifespan is so short after it's been produced. But in this paper in the World Journal of Gastroenterology, they showed that 37% of celiac patients, when they tested them, had elevated zonulin levels. Meaning, now celiac, of course, they have permeability. Only 37% showed elevated zonulin levels because it had disappeared. The lifespan is 4 minutes to 4 hours, but 86% of celiac patients have the antibodies to zonulin because the antibodies will live for 4 to 6 weeks after they're produced. So checking the antibodies to zonulin is much more sensitive. Now in this test called the wheat zoomer, they do both. They look at, I'll back up, they look at zonulin levels and zonulin antibodies. They do both. That's why I like this test so much. And this is the rest of that test that looks at transglutaminases, the fusion peptides. The third one down here is the most sensitive marker that somebody is on the celiac spectrum long before they ever have villus atrophy. And they look at the non-gluten wheat proteins, not just gluten, but the non-gluten wheat proteins. Here is the report on those components. And they look at wheat allergies, the IgE component. And they look at the gliadin panel. That's all of these. It's a very comprehensive test. Most laboratories are only looking at this marker, alpha-gliadin, which is a good marker, but 50% of people of celiacs don't have that elevated. They've got other peptides of wheat elevated. Now you can be much more thorough on your testing, which is why it's 97 to 99% sensitive and 98 to 100% specific. Okay, so how do we rebuild a healthy protective microbiome? I'm going to give you a 5-step process to do that. The first is to understand that non-digestible nutrients, meaning fiber, are the food to produce the probiotics in our gut. When we take adequate amounts of the prebiotics, you see that you increase bifido, increase lacto, increase Akkermansia, increase Faecobacterium, increase the Bacteroides to Prevotella species ratios. And at the bottom, you see that you decrease glycemia, decrease insulin resistance, decrease fat, increase glucose tolerance, decrease inflammation, decrease metabolic endotoxemia when you feed enough prebiotics. What you have to understand, and we talked about it back in June, not going to review it today, go back to that June webinar to review it, that 78% of the prebiotic in the Western diet comes from wheat. Take wheat out of their diet, replace it with gluten-free foods that have no prebiotic value, they're just white paste, and the patients develop a deficiency of prebiotics in their diet, and the result is within a few months they've got dysbiosis and they're sicker than they were before. They feel better for a while going gluten-free because you reduce the environmental trigger, but you create a more dysbiotic gut unless you supply the prebiotics. It's critically important to supply the prebiotics. When the growth of beneficial bacteria is not supported with prebiotics due to a reduced supply of their main energy source because you put them on a gluten-free diet, which was the main supply of their prebiotics, other bacterial groups, which can be opportunistic pathogens, overgrow and lead to dysbiosis. So, Mrs. Patient, every day, when you go shopping for your vegetables, organic, of course, get a few of every root vegetable in the store, every one. Jicama, plantain, carrots, potatoes, sweet potatoes, turnips, parsnips, radishes, every one of them, because all of the fibers of the different root vegetables are prebiotics that feed different families of probiotics. So you don't want to eat just jicama. You want a variety of the root vegetables. And then go to Google and type into Google list of prebiotic foods and print out the list, put it on your refrigerator. And every day you have 2 prebiotics from the list and 1 root vegetable every day, you and your family. And you'll find that onions are a prebiotic. Garlic is a prebiotic. Bananas are a prebiotic. You'll find there are many prebiotics that are available and in your diet already. Every day, so you have to teach your patients to change their lifestyle. Here's an example of this. This paper, when I read it, it dropped my jaw. This was a researcher who worked really hard at university getting his PhD in microbiology, but he gained a great deal of weight. And he remembered that his grandmother told him that he should always eat Chinese yams and bitter melon. They're prebiotics. And it's like kimchi to the Chinese, kimchi to the Koreans. The Chinese ferment these root vegetables. And he combined these prebiotics with a diet based on whole grains. He didn't go gluten-free. He should have, but he didn't. And he lost 20 kilograms in 2 years just by having the prebiotics. He was monitoring his microbiome also because he's a microbiologist. And he found that Faecobacterium was undetectable when he first tested it. 2 years later, by doing these prebiotics, 14.5% of the entire microbiome was fecal bacteria, which increases fat burning in the body. It changes your metabolism to burn more fat. And these are the prebiotics that they use, Chinese yam and Chinese bitter melon. So use the prebiotics that are in your area. Root vegetables across the board, alternating root vegetables all the time. Look at the change in this guy in 2 years. In 2 years, just by changing his prebiotics and eating a whole grain diet. Mrs. Patient, while you're eating these root vegetables and the other from the list, the Google list that you print out, I want you for 2 months to take a prebiotic. So you're learning to eat prebiotics, but I want you to take a prebiotic. The one that I use is called Mega Prebiotic. I want you to do it for 2 months because we have to change your microbiome now. And we have to build more of the good bacteria. Patients will take supplements for a couple of months. If you give them a window, they'll do it. They'll do it while you're changing their lifestyle. That's the critical component. You're changing their lifestyle. And as long as just patient, just do this for a couple of months. Now, my wife and I, we take it every day. We put it in a smoothie every day, but I'm not asking you to do that, just for a couple of months. Then, that's number 1 and number 2. Now we want to rebuild a healthier protective mucus layer. And Mrs. Patient, I want you to have a cup per day of bone broth. Anytime you bake a chicken, save all the bones and the skin and make bone broth out of it. I also put a couple of sheets of nori, the seaweed nori. I just take scissors, cut it up, and I put it in the pot of water and boil it because it's full of minerals. And you just made bone broth. Now, why do we recommend bone broth? Because gelatin tannate protects the mucosa, and it forms a layer similar to the mucus lining of your gut where your gut is damaged. That gives the gut chance to heal. So when you have intestinal permeability, tears in the cheesecloth, this is what you have. But when you take gelatin tannate, you put a protective layer down where the damaged intestine is, which gives it a chance to heal. So 1 cup a day of bone broth. Next, Mrs. Patient, for 2 months, I want you to take a supplement to help heal your gut. While you're taking the bone broth, you take Mega Mucosa. This is the one I use because it works really well. It's exceptional in how it works. And I'm giving a patient for a couple of months, you're going to take some supplements to heal your gut because your rheumatoid arthritis will not get better unless we heal your gut. You'll feel better for a little while, everything else we're doing, but it'll come back and we have to stop the mechanism that's destroying your joints unless we heal your gut. So for a couple of months, you're going to take some supplements. I take this every day. I put it in my smoothie every day. I just throw it in there with everything else. Next, Mrs. Patient, I want you to get 5 different types of fermented vegetables, 5 different types. Get sauerkraut, kimchi, fermented beets, curry flavored, whatever other flavors you like. And every day you have 1 tablespoon of fermented vegetables. Why? Because when you're eating fermented vegetables, it's a way of counteracting the sterilized food that we eat in the Western diet. And when you do this, you increase the number of microbes in the diet by up to 10,000-fold. So you're re-inoculating your gut with good bacteria because you don't have enough good bacteria right now. That's why you got a leaky gut, is because the environment of the microbiome is not good. So we're giving you supplements to help build a healthier microbiome or the healthier gut lining and the prebiotics to feed the good bacteria, but you got to inoculate with the good bacteria. So you eat a tablespoon every day of fermented vegetables, and you alternate them because all the fermented vegetables produce different families of the probiotic bacteria. And for 2 months, I want you to take a probiotic that's spore-based, because the spore-based, we get the best results we've ever gotten. I've been using probiotics since 1980, when people had never heard the word lactobacillus. They didn't know what that meant. It was Latin, and it was some weird word. And bacteria, doc, you want me to take bacteria? Yes, it's going to help make you stronger. The results we get with the spore are better than we've ever gotten before. So for 2 months, Mrs. Patient, I want you to take this in your protocol, because we're building that healthy gut. My wife and I take this every night before we go to sleep, but I'm not asking you to do that, just for 2 months. Next, Mrs. Patient, arguably the most powerful enzyme in your gut is called intestinal alkaline phosphatase. It's a really good guy for you, and it does so many beneficial things for you. Intestinal alkaline phosphatase. It helps to heal the gut lining. It's expressed in most mammals, and it's routinely monitored. It's easy to test. A blood test will tell you. But what it does, one of the main things it does is it grabs lipopolysaccharide. It locks up LPS so that it can't get through a leaky gut into the submucosa, into your bloodstream. It locks it up and it escorts it out in the stool. That's one of the reasons why intestinal alkaline phosphatase is so important for you. It detoxes LPS. It just escorts it right out. It reduces systemic inflammation. It gives you protection of the gut barrier. It modulates the microbiota. It helps to feed the good bacteria so they thrive more. Here's another drawing of when you have enough intestinal alkaline phosphatase on the left. It binds with LPS and it escorts it out. And it cannot get into activating toll-like receptor 4. LPS will not activate toll-like receptor 4 if it's bound to intestinal alkaline phosphatase. But when you don't have enough IAP, LPS activates toll-like receptor 4. That's what toll-like receptor 4 is there for, to protect us from bugs and bacteria. And it activates the whole inflammatory cascade. Intestinal alkaline phosphatase will reduce LPS 100-fold, not 10 times, not 20 times, not 50 times, 100-fold reduction in LPS when you have enough intestinal alkaline phosphatase. And how do you get enough intestinal alkaline phosphatase? By the pectin in apples. Mrs. Patient, I want you to take 4 or 5 apples, always organic, wash them, leave the skin on, dice them up, throw the seeds away, dice them up, put them in a pot, add water to 1/3 the height of the apples, add a little cinnamon, maybe some raisins, turn it on high to boil, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, but later look in the pot. When you see a shine on the skin of the apples, turn it off, you're done. You've made applesauce. The shine on the skin of the apples is the pectin that was in the meat and the skin of the apple. Now it's released. Now it's sitting on the surface, and it's easily accessible in the gut to make more intestinal alkaline phosphatase. This is what, when you add pectin to the gut of animals, they had 11% reduction in tumor necrosis factor, 12% reduction in IL-6, 75% reduction in LPS getting into the bloodstream, 47% increase in intestinal alkaline phosphatase, then you see the other numbers all the way down. And 72% reduction in toll-like receptor 4 expression, meaning pectin increases intestinal alkaline phosphatase, which grabs at LPS and it escorts it out in the stool so it doesn't activate toll-like receptor 4. Remember, Fasano said it's gluten and LPS that activates that causes intestinal permeability by activating toll-like receptor 4 in everyone. Applesauce, 1 tablespoon a day of fresh applesauce. And when you make it, it'll last 3-4 days, fine. You can't buy the commercial stuff. It doesn't have enough pectin in it. Apple-derived pectin modulates gut microbiota, attenuates metabolic endotoxemia and inflammation, suppresses weight gain and fat accumulation. And you have to use organic apples because they have 34 to 54% more phenolics. That means and more pectin and more of the phenolics that increase the microbiota, they feed the beneficial microbiota. So always organic. Okay, we don't need to talk anymore about intestinal alkaline phosphatase. It increases so much. So the supplements are Megaspore Biotic, Mega Prebiotic, Mega Mucosa, and Wheat Rescue. The foods, let me back that up. The foods are root vegetables, 2 from the list of prebiotics every day and 1 root vegetable, a tablespoon of fermented vegetables every day. And for those that don't like fermented vegetables, start with a teaspoon. Hide it in the salad dressing, hide it in the mashed potatoes. You don't have to taste it. You don't have to taste it to get it to work in your gut. You just got to get it down there. And applesauce, root vegetables, fermented vegetables, applesauce. Megaspore Biotic, Mega Prebiotic, Mega Mucosa, Wheat Rescue. That is the protocol for 2 months, and you rebuild a vibrant, dynamic microbiome, as long as you are not continuing the environmental exposure of the inflammatory foods, and you will change that person's microbiome. My prayer is that you will watch this again and again and really learn this, really dial it down. I have a full course online. It's called Certified Gluten Practitioner, and it's certifiedglutenpractitioner.com. You take it at your own pace. It's about 10, 12 hours long. You've got 3 months to finish it. When you pass the test, you go to the next section and you get all of this and so much more. There's 350 studies. I think it's 370 now. Studies that I review in those 10 to 12 hours. And you really understand autoimmunity when you do that. But if you cannot do the Certified Gluten Practitioner program, then of course, the books. We talk about all of this in the books. All of it is there for you to review again and again and again. For those of you that don't know, we did this series. It's at Betrayal. I interviewed 85 of the world leaders. I request that you go to thedoctor.com/betrayal. Just watch the first episode and see what you think. Usually, people's jaws drop because we show you how to reverse MS and how to reverse rheumatoid and how to reverse chronic fatigue and how to reverse multiple chemical sensitivities and psoriasis. And you see the patients talking. The patients are interviewed and the doctors are interviewed and the scientists are interviewed. And it's all free at thedoctor.com/betrayal. So take care of yourselves. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for your kind attention. And I'm going to stop sharing screen so that we can answer questions for you now.
Thank you, Tom. So I have a question because I want to know that if you know if there is a relation between LPS elevated and also the rise of the ACE2 receptors. For example, for this situation with COVID-19.
I understand the question, and I have never seen a paper on that. I would suspect it's true. Now, I've not looked for those papers, but I would suspect that is true.
Yes, because there is a low-grade inflammation there, no?
Yes, yes, always.
And also, what do you think about a ketogenic diet and elevation of LPS?
I was just interviewed recently for the ketogenic summit that will be coming out soon. And I thought about that before the interview, and so I decided to do this. We currently are doing a study on LPS and ketogenic diets, because one of the 6 methods of LPS getting into the bloodstream is lipid raft transcytosis. Mm-hmm. What that means, lipid means fats, raft like a boat, transcytosis right through the cell. We absorb our fats through the cells of the intestines, not between the cells. Proteins, sugars go between the cells through the Panama Canal, but our fats go through the cell, transcytosis. LPS piggybacks on the back of fat molecules and gets carried in. So someone that already has crossed the threshold of LPS and they have elevated antibodies to LPS, if they do a ketogenic diet, they're going to get really sick.
Yes.
And it may take a few years, but they're accelerating the amount of LPS getting into their body by the higher fat diet. So we're doing a study right now. We've just begun the study, and we're doing blood tests on everyone. We're identifying if they qualify for the study, if they've got intestinal permeability or elevated LPS antibodies, they're in the study, and they are not doing a ketogenic diet right now. They'll do the 90-day protocol that I just gave you. That's the exact protocol we're doing with all of these people. We have about 125 people that we're doing this with, and then we'll retest them in 90 days, and I believe we'll see that the vast majority of them now, if they're compliant, because we're putting them on a gluten-free, dairy-free, added sugar-free diet, and that protocol I just gave you, and I believe we're going to see practically everyone, their permeability is healed, and they no longer have elevated LPS antibodies. And then they'll ask me, well, can I do keto now? And I will say, well, there's no reason why not, but you really should probably check 3-4 months down the road to see if the LPS antibodies came back. If they did, no, you can't. But that's the only way to know whether, because I know of no other risk on the ketogenic diet. I think it's a good diet for some people to try for a period of time. I think it can help with many conditions, but if they already have crossed the threshold of LPS, then they cannot do a ketogenic diet.
Mm-hmm. Because the other day I saw a paper, a study from the university from North Texas with Megaspore, and they show that with Megaspore, after a high fat meal, they have low LPS levels. So
Yes.
it's better maybe to make a ketogenic diet with probiotics and everything, Megaspore, okay?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. To your first question about ACE2 receptors and LPS, when I have a question like that, what I do is I go to PubMed.gov and I typed in ACE2 and LPS, and there's 35 studies that come up right away. So not every study is going to say there's a problem, but I would suspect we're going to find most of the studies show the correlation.
Yes, yes, maybe. We have a question from Dr. Karen Vedder. You know her, she works with me at the clinic. So yes. She wants to ask, okay.
Hi, Dr. Tom. Thank you. Thank you for all the information. That it's amazing for us. I have a question. Well, here in real life, we don't have the possibility to do tests to our patient because sometimes it's pretty expensive for them. I realize in practice that most of our patients are suffering a dysbiosis. How often do you think we have to give the supplements for the gut restore?
Good question, thank you. And I'm sorry, this is going to sound 100% of the patients. Every autoimmune patient, when you read the science, and in my online course, I've got many studies on this, every autoimmune patient, the autoimmune spectrum initiates through the gateway in the development of autoimmune disease, the leaky gut. That is the gateway by which the systemic inflammatory response occurs. And depending on your genetics, if it manifests in your brain or your joints or your skin or your heart or your lungs or your liver, that's determined by your genetics and the environmental triggers that you've been exposed to. When you understand this concept, if you review my book, The Autoimmune Fix, I go through it in great detail. You will say, oh, that's how, okay, that makes sense. That's how that occurs. Okay. Then I would rather err on the side of caution. If someone has an autoimmune mechanism going on, every single person gets this gut protocol.
Thank you.
Dr. Tom, we have a lot of questions. I don't know if you want to answer maybe 10. It's okay for you?
My time is yours. So.
Okay, perfect. So Dr. Vasquez asked, please comment about the risk of root canals.
Yeah.
Perdón, doctor Tom, voy a decirle en español que él habla acerca de las endodoncias, de los tratamientos de nervio. Es lo que él quiere saber. Please go.
I am not a dentist, but a root canal would be the very last option that I would look to. One of the dangers of root canals is called cavitations. And cavitations are bacteria that develop in the canal that can go on for years. And their cavitations have been associated with cardiovascular disease. They've been associated with chronic fatigue. There are many different conditions that when you can't find the reason, why is this patient's symptom pattern, and you've gone down your checklist and none of the more common things apply, why is this patient having this severe depression? Her neurotransmitters are not that bad. Where is the treatment? Why is this patient's joints? How come they can't walk? And when you're confused, always consider cavitations. They are a hidden threat that many times are behind unexplained symptom patterns. And they come from the result of root canals.
Okay, also, Rosana Herrera asks, how do I know that the products I buy are completely gluten-free?
You don't. That's why you need Wheat Rescue. My wife and I, everywhere we go, she carries them in her purse. And anytime we're eating out, gluten-free restaurant doesn't matter, because now I've read the science and there's no way. If you saw Dr. Green's study, 5,624 things they ordered on gluten-free menus, 50.1% of all gluten-free pizza, 54% of gluten-free pasta is not gluten-free. In my full day course, I show you the studies. They looked at 15 cultivars of quinoa. Quinoa is a very good grain, high protein, good grain. 4 of the cultivars were toxic with gluten. Not contamination, but in the plant. 4 of the cultivars of quinoa had toxic gluten proteins in the plant. Because quinoa has become such a popular grain in the last 20 years, they grow quinoa all over the world now. It used to grow only on altitude in Peru, but now they grow hybrids, not at high altitude, but down at sea level. And they crossbred plants of quinoa with grasses. And some of the grasses have toxic gluten in them. And so 4 of 15 types, cultivars of quinoa were toxic with gluten. And I go through all of that type of information in the Certified Gluten Practitioner course. So there's no way anyone is safe to be gluten-free. And every time you're exposed to gluten, it causes tears in the cheesecloth for every person, every time. I think I've got 5 studies on that in the CertifiedGlutenPractitioner.com course. So it's overwhelming when you look at this. And there's no way to be safe except to take wheat rescue. At this point, that's the only thing you can do.
Yes, as you say, it's better to take wheat rescue, no? It's safe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
This person asks if probiotics are bacteria, it is recommendable for a ulcerative colitis patient to take them since we have open wounds and could get infected. Lo que pregunta es si para una persona que, sabiendo que los probióticos son bacterias, que sí es recomendable para una persona que tiene una colitis ulcerativa, sí, sabiendo que tiene heridas abiertas y pensar que sí se pueden ser infectadas.
Okay, if I'm understanding the question, the open wounds of psoriatic arthritis are on the skin.
Yes.
They're on the skin. And if you're taking a probiotic orally, it's not going to be on the skin.
He's asking about ulcerative colitis.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ulcerative colitis. Thank you.
Yes.
That's a very valid question. That is a very valid question. With severe ulcerative colitis, I would not recommend taking probiotics. I would do the dietary protocol for a few months first and then retest and see how they're doing. Very valid question. There are a few papers on the dangers of probiotics with ulcerative colitis. Very good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Y es si el Dr. Tom recomienda el uso el consumo de sauerkraut como probiótico y que aparte de los tubérculos, ¿qué otra cosa recomienda? He's asking Dr. Tom do you recommend the use of sauerkraut as a probiotic? And what else do you recommend besides roots? I think that you already answered that.
Well, sauerkraut, kimchi, there are many different flavors of kimchi in the health food stores you can get. There's a really good book called The Kimchi Diet. It came out last year by Suzanne Bennett, Dr. Suzanne Bennett. It's an excellent book on how to make your own kimchi. It's simple, inexpensive, takes 3-4 days. Once you've done it a couple of times, it's very easy, and you can change the flavors and change. Every vegetable that ferments produces different families of bacteria. So that's why you want to alternate. Miso is good to alternate with. Some sauerkraut, kimchi, fermented beets, fermented pickles, alternating all the time. What is it that my wife likes to drink? Kombucha. Kombucha without a lot of sugar. The problem with commercial kombuchas, they have way too much sugar. So make sure you're conscious of which ones you're choosing so that they're low in sugar.
Yes. Dulce Mariñez nos dice que qué opina de la dieta de carbohidratos específicos para pacientes con SIBO y aumento de permeabilidad intestinal. So Dulce is asking, what's your opinion on specific carbo diets for patients with SIBO and leaky gut?
Yeah, it's a little more difficult. For people with SIBO, using the fermented vegetables is often difficult. And sometimes you can only do, one strand of sauerkraut inside mashed potatoes so you don't taste it. You do just a little bit, or maybe just the juice, a spoonful of juice, and you have to work it up. It could take a few months to work up to where you're inoculating with healthy bacteria. The spores are excellent to use for inoculation with SIBO, but it's more of a sensitive patient, and you have to move slower with them. You can't charge in as quickly.
Nos pregunta James Arias que si el kefir de leche funciona como un alimento fermentado para ayudar con la salud intestinal. Does milk kefir works as fermented food to help you with gut health?
Good question. The commercial kefirs are full of sugar. They taste really good because they have a lot of sweet in them. If you're making kefir at home, I would suggest you use coconut milk and make coconut kefir. But using milk kefir, it's a good idea as long as it doesn't have a lot of sugar. And it depends on whether you have a dairy sensitivity. If you have a dairy sensitivity, the proteins of the kefir can activate your immune system to fight the kefir, and you create more inflammation. And milk antibodies circulating in your bloodstream cross-react just like wheat antibodies and gluten antibodies cross-react. Just go on Google and type in casein, which is a protein of dairy, and sudden infant death syndrome. And when what? And you start to understand the dangers of milk sensitivities. So if you want to use kefir, when I do the dairy zoomer test, blood test on people, the zoomers, because you zoom in on the problem, the wheat zoomer is the one I showed you tonight, and there's a dairy zoomer, corn zoomer, egg zoomer, peanut zoomer. They're very comprehensive tests. When you do the dairy zoomer, I've not had one patient ever come back and be okay with dairy, ever. And these tests are 97 to 99% sensitive and 98 to 100% specific, meaning that we're all carrying antibodies to dairy, to cow's milk. It's meant for a cow. And when you make kefir with it, you break down some of the proteins, but there's no way to know if you're fueling the immune response or not. So I would suggest coconut kefir. If that's not available to you, the milks that are less offensive to the human body are camel milk, donkey milk, and reindeer milk.
You know, here in Costa Rica, and you also know, there is a coconut yogurt del cocal, and it's very good, I think. And it also has probiotics, so it could work.
Yes, yes. Coconut milk yogurts are tasty. Just be careful of the sugar contents in them.
Yes. So, Rosana Briceño Sánchez dice que si hay alguna recomendación para tratar Klebsiella neumonía cuando ya se fue vista en un test para intestino en lugar de antibióticos. Do you have a recommendation to treat Klebsiella pneumonia seen in a gut test other than antibiotics?
Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness, yes. Biocidin. There's a biocidin protocol that I've used for 30 years. It's my go-to product for any bacterial infection, and it's rare that it doesn't work. It usually does work. And it comes in 3 forms. It comes in a spray, a liquid, and capsules. And I give patients all 3. The spray, sometimes you have to titrate it up. You start slow and gradually build them up. But the sprays, a couple of squirts of spray twice a day. The drops would be 2 drops in a little bit of water, and they gargle and swallow, and then 2 capsules. And for an adult, I titrate that up slowly to 4 capsules twice a day, 4 drops twice a day, and 4 sprays twice a day. But you have to do that slowly because it's pretty powerful, safe but powerful.
Yes, I love also Biocidin. It's a wonderful product. I love it. Rosana también pregunta acerca de las manzanas cocinadas. O sea, ¿son mejores que las crudas para conseguir pectinas? Apples cooked, are they better than raw to get enough pectins?
Yes, that's why you cook them, is because the pectin is released and it's more on the surface, so it's easily accessible in the small intestine, which is where you want this to work to heal the gut. Raw apples are fine, but they won't have the same effect. But this is where, in English, there is a saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And this is why. It's because it really does work. You increase intestinal alkaline phosphatase that has so many benefits to create a healthy microbiome, that has so many benefits to reverse intestinal permeability, that has so many benefits to reduce systemic inflammation, that has so many benefits that you don't get a disease. You see how one does the other, does the other, does the other. That's why apples, and I am not saying apples are going to cure rheumatoid arthritis. Don't ever do that, and misquote me. Apples are a component. Cooked apples are a component of a comprehensive program to help patients turn around their health.
Because you said that for this recipe with apple, do you recommend only a spoon of liquid water or?
No, 1/3. So the apples are in the pan. So if this is apples up to here, 1/3 the height. You pour water into about 1/3 the height, and then add some cinnamon.
Also, nos preguntan que si la dieta alta en grasas naturales regula la permeabilidad intestinal. Do high natural fat diets help with intestinal permeability?
No. High fat diets do not help with permeability. Quality fats help with intestinal permeability, but not high fat diets. I've never seen any evidence of that.
Nicole nos pregunta, dice que es estudiante de nutrición y dietética y pregunta que si la mayoría de los productos gluten, o sea, ¿qué podemos hacer con los productos gluten free? Porque la mayoría tienen. Nicole asked, she's a student from nutrition, and if most gluten-free products contain gluten, what other alternatives are there?
Same body as your ancestor 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago. You have the same kidneys, the same heart, the same eyes. Everything works the same. Humans have been on the planet for a few million years, and we've developed survival mechanisms. We've adapted to survive. There's only been wheat with agriculture 10,000 years, a blip on the screen of 2 million years. What did your ancient ancestors eat? Fruit, vegetables, nuts, seeds. Occasionally they could kill an animal. They had some meat, not every day. How often did they eat grains? Never. I don't think there's anything wrong with having some grains once in a while. I love gluten-free pasta. I'll take 2 Wheat Rescue just to be safe before I eat gluten-free pasta. I'm half Italian. I'm going to eat pasta once in a while, maybe once every 2 weeks. I will have some. But we've grown up believing that we're supposed to eat grains every day. No evidence for that. Our bodies, the human body, is not designed to eat grains on a regular basis. Just basic physiology. But when we've grown up eating grains most every meal, every day, it's a transition. You know, so maybe you start, and with your patients, you start yourself, and then you do it with your patients. Mrs. Patient, let's try for 3 breakfasts a week, no grains. 3 breakfasts a week. And then go to every breakfast with no grains. And then go to every breakfast with no grains and 3 lunches a week with no grains. You know, and you have to change the lifestyle. And you don't do that in a day or a week. But if you have a plan, and if you just stick to the plan, it may take you a year before you're not eating grains every day. Maybe. But our plate should always be at least half the plate is the colors of the rainbow. At least half of the plate should be vegetables, bright colors, as many as possible. Some fruit, not a lot of fruit, but some fruit. But the rainbow diet should be the basis of how we eat to get the phytonutrients, the polyphenols that are so beneficial, and our bodies thrive on these. The deeper the colors, the healthier the fruit or vegetable.
Beatriz Mote nos dice que qué síntomas son típicos que nos permite presumir que una persona sufre de permeabilidad intestinal. What symptoms are typical on patients with intestinal permeability?
Well, the obvious ones are gut symptoms. I mean, if they've got gut symptoms, it's most likely, that's certainly on the checklist you want to be concerned about. But any autoimmune symptom, what would that be? Well, your thyroid. You got cold hands and feet, you're sluggish, you can't lose weight even if you don't eat very much. You know, you have thyroid problems, you have autoimmune thyroid going on, you got to fix the gut. Along with addressing thyroid function, but you have to fix the gut. Rheumatoid, you have to fix the gut. Psoriasis, you have to fix the gut. When you read the autoimmune fix, or if you do the certified gluten practitioner program, this just makes sense. There are 5 pillars in the development of chronic inflammatory diseases. What disease comes in your office that's not a chronic inflammatory disease? None. The only thing that's not a chronic inflammatory disease is trauma, right? But aside from that, everything that comes into you is chronic inflammatory diseases. And there's 5 pillars in the development of chronic inflammatory disease. When you understand this basic concept, we start thinking, it's like you change your glasses and you get a new prescription. Oh, I can see now. We just start thinking differently.
Susana Mantovani asks, thank you much, muchas gracias, Dr. Tom, excelente. Tengo mucha experiencia con síndrome de intestino irritable desde 1990 y tengo muchas explicaciones para todas, ¿verdad? Como para este gran acertijo que son todas esas enfermedades inflamatorias. Muchas gracias. Susana Mantovani, thank you very much, Doctor. Excellent. I have experience with IBD since 1990, and a lot of your explanations were pieces to a big puzzle in these inflammatory diseases. Very glad to attend you such amazing webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
And also tenemos aquí una pregunta que nos dice Carolina, que ¿qué pasa con la glutamina y la permeabilidad del intestino? Can you talk about glutamine and the relation with leaky gut?
Yes, it's an important component in the nutritional protocol. There's a concept called a pleiotropic approach. Pleiotropic means many approaches for the same result. And the genes that are turned on to heal the gut by glutamine, and there are many, are different than the genes that are turned on by vitamin D to heal the gut. They're different than the genes that are turned on by fish oils to heal the gut. They're different than the genes that are turned on by applesauce to heal the gut. That a pleiotropic approach means you're seeing the big picture. There are many components that can help, not just glutamine. We knew about glutamine back in the 1980s, early 80s, and it's helpful. It's very helpful and should be included for most everyone, unless they have yeast infections, or sometimes if they have inflammatory bowel diseases, it can be a problem. But it's not the cure by itself. It's a component that can help. The only supplement that I know of that is complete all by itself is colostrum. Colostrum is Mother Nature's way of healing a leaky gut, because every newborn baby has a leaky gut. It's normal to have leaky gut. But the first 3 days of mother's breast milk is not milk, it's colostrum, because colostrum turns on all the genes in the gut to close those tight junctions. Let's get the good bacteria to bind onto the walls of the intestines. Let's start making the mucus now to protect the bacteria. All of that is turned on by colostrum. There's no supplement that will ever take the place of that. So glutamine is an excellent component. We have, on my website, thedoctor.com, we have gluten sensitivity packs. And the pack is, one pack, it's 6 pills. Because patients aren't going to open a bunch of bottles, but they'll take 1 pack a day. Miss Patient, can you take 1 pack a day? Yeah, there's 6 pills and it's 1 pack. And if they think that way, they'll take 1 pack a day. But there's 22 nutrients in there that all turn on different genes to heal the gut, reduce inflammation. So please make sure that you have that you're developing that pleiotropic overview. Don't just give glutamine. Glutamine is helpful, but you must do more than that.
Lucas Fernández pregunta que si deberíamos quitar el gluten aun cuando no tenemos síntomas de ningún tipo de enfermedad. So we should avoid gluten even if we have not symptoms of any disease?
Yes. I rarely say, no, I actually never say that. So let me rephrase that, because I sound like a fanatic if I say that. I think that anyone that has a health concern should do the Wheat-Zoomer test and identify that your immune system is fighting wheat. Then the question is, well, why would I take anything that's causing inflammation for me every time I eat it? But every human gets transient intestinal permeability every time they eat wheat. Every human. Just read the science.
La doctora Lisette Hernández, esta sería la última, que nos preguntan acerca de que si es cierto que la leche, ¿verdad?, está asociada a la permeabilidad intestinal, y si es dañina, ¿verdad?, puede aumentar la inflamación. Y también nos preguntan acerca del maíz. They ask about the role of the milk in the intestinal permeability, because she thinks that it's very dangerous to increase the inflammation, and also about corn, if corn can cause leaky gut.
Yes, both can. It's difficult for us as physicians because so often our patients don't have the resources to pay for a lot of testing. But I think every physician should do these tests themselves and see for themselves. And once you do the test for yourself or your family, and you see, and then you do a little study to confirm these tests, how accurate are they? And when you read the papers from Mayo Clinic or Columbia, talking about these tests are correct 97 to 99% of the time. And then you look at the laboratories that you're currently using, ask them for their sensitivity and specificity, they won't tell you because it's usually in the 70s, meaning it's right 7 or 8 out of 10 times, meaning it's wrong 2 or 3 out of 10 times. But once you've done the test for yourself, and then you talk to your patient, I did this test for me or for my daughter, and I was so surprised to see, because we didn't feel bad at all. But when we took the corn or the wheat out of my daughter's diet, she lost 15 pounds in 2 months. And she had a little extra weight that she was trying to lose. You see it, and it just takes time to see it again and again and again. You see the benefits of looking at the immune system. And the way I say to the patients is that the immune system is the armed forces in your body. It's the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, the Navy. It's there to protect you. So you don't want to activate the immune system because that causes the chronic inflammatory diseases that have been on the rise for the last 3 decades. And when you look at the foods that we're eating, and see, people think, well, I feel fine when I eat cheese. I feel fine. And what they're associating that with is that they don't have gut pain. The lucky ones are the ones that get gut pain. They're lucky because they know, oh, if I eat this, I'm going to feel like that. The unlucky ones are the ones that don't get gut pain. And we know with wheat, the ratio is 8 to 1. The science is really clear. For every 1 person that gets gut symptoms with a sensitivity to wheat, there are 8 that don't. They get brain symptoms or joint symptoms or skin symptoms, but not gut. Not gut. And so they think they're fine when they eat wheat or when they eat dairy. So this is a journey for every one of us that as you start exploring and you look for the hard evidence, and then you do it with you and your family first, and you see it again and again and again, and then you start talking to your patients about it, and you just see results like you've never seen before. That's what Betrayal is all about. I would encourage everyone to watch Betrayal. It's at thedoctor.com/betrayal. Just watch the first episode. It's my friend Mark Hyman and I and Jeff Bland, the founder of Functional Medicine, and a few others in the first episode. And you just go, wow, this is powerful. This makes sense. Okay.
And I think it's very important to know that maybe it's not only gut problems that you can have, also you can have emotional problems, neurological problems, and because everything is connected, no?
Yes.
So people are asking about where they can get the products, the microbiome products.
You're welcome to use my account. If you want to give them through your office, Dra.Patricia, we just were texting about this 20 minutes before we started. And I just told Microbiome because you've not been able to open an account yet yourself. I said, use my account, it's fine. So whatever you work out with Microbiome, your office can be my mailing address to ship to, whatever works. I'm happy to support this. Okay.
And also, if you live in Costa Rica, you can have the products here in our clinic, Clínica Kumara, in Curridabat or Escazú. And also, thank a lot Rafael Sanchez from Microbiome Labs, because he was working a lot with us for this webinar, and he also gave us some products, not only for today, also because we are going to make a giveaway next week. So thank you, Rafael.
Thank you, Dr. Sam, and thank you, Dra.Patricia Madrigal. It's only possible with you and those that participated and the positive feedback that we're getting from this presentation. So thank you once again.
Thank you. And Rafael, I corresponded with Tom Bain about a half hour before this began, and I said, you know, I told Dr. Patricia that use my account, you know, whatever, it's fine. Let's let these people try this and see the results. So however you can work that out is fine with me.
Great, thank you, will do.
Okay.
Great.
So thank you, Dr. Tom, as always, wonderful, your speech. So I hope next time we can continue learning with you.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be with you. And thank you everyone all over the world for being here. And take care of yourselves. And please study these concepts. Professor Fasano's 5 pillars, this whole concept of where does chronic inflammatory disease come from? It will change the way you think and change the practice. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Muchas gracias a todos. Y bueno, muchísimas gracias a Dr. Tom, a todo el equipo de Kumara, porque siempre trabajan mucho, a Microbiome Labs, a Rafael, por ayudarnos en todo esto. Y bueno, cuídense mucho, coman bien y pues que estén todos muy bien. Gracias.